Obviously, Caesar's army is different from the army of Polybius, the army that had fought against Hannibal. We've noticed some structural differences you can see. You have, when I was a mere lad, and even probably when I was still an undergraduate, people were still pushing the idea of a drastic change in the way the army was recruited, usually associated with Marius, end of the 2nd century BC, that because Sallust talks about Marius recruiting from the poorest, the Capiticensi, the head count, and taking volunteers from them to go off to fight in Numidia, that from then on, that's how the army is recruited and nothing else. It's more complicated than that, but there is obviously some truth in the traditional picture, which has the hoplite class, for want of a better term. The Roman citizens with sufficient property to make them eligible for military service, coming under strain during the course of the 2nd century. 3rd century BC, you're basically fighting wars in Italy until in the Second Punic War, well, First Punic War you go to Sicily, but it's not that far away. And then the Second Punic War, you'll have armies in Spain, in Macedonia, in North Africa. Beyond that, you then end up with permanent provinces that require a garrison at least most of the time, and a much longer term commitment. The Second Punic War is a crisis for the Romans because obviously Hannibal is going around, and as we talked about in the session on that, the appalling losses that the Roman state suffers in the first 3 campaigns in particular, and then the prolonged presence of an enemy on Italian soil means that this is an emergency. And you can do things differently. You can strain the way society normally works to cope with an emergency because the situation is so desperate. Just that basic thing, the reminder that by 216, a third of the Senate has died within the course of 3 campaigns, and something like 100,000 Romans and allied soldiers. These are staggering amounts that ought to have defeated any community, but don't in the case of the Romans. Once you start having these provincial commitments, you're keeping garrisons in distant provinces. There are quite frequent conflicts, especially in the Spanish provinces, various parts of the 2nd century. You end up with a strain that you can come in, obviously it's connected with the Gracchi, with the perception of the decline of the class of sort of small-scale farmers, independent farmers, because they're going off to fight in the wars. Farm goes into ruin while they're away, and it's bought up by a big investor, worked by slave labor, all that sort of thing.